Okay, so now we're going to make a blueberry or a mixed berry kuchen, depending on what you can find. I was lucky enough to be able to come up with marionberries, raspberries, and blueberries, so I'm going to go all in. Although this works really well also with blueberries. The only difference with the blueberries is that once you put in your cup of blueberries, you want to go ahead and toss that in a little bit of flour so that the blueberries don't sink to the bottom of your dough. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and preheat your oven to 375 degrees. And if you have a pan, you can go ahead and oil it or grease it. You definitely want to prepare your pan with this recipe because the kuchen is, it's berry laden. Berries, once they're cooked, love to stick. And I have to tell you that this recipe, though I love it, a kuchen is basically a type of coffee cake. Because the berries end up being cooked for so long, I usually just use frozen berries for this recipe. Sometimes feel that it's a waste to put really nice soft berries like a raspberry in a cake, which is why normally in the wintertime when you can get good frozen berries, blueberries are usually the best ones to come with because they're a firm berry and they retain a lot of their shape. But this one I was really lucky to find. I think that this berry mix, I think that it is lovely. So if you can find that, then great. If you can't, blueberries are just as well. So I'm going to add 2 cups, oh my gosh, of flour. Well, 1.5 cups of flour. And to my 1.5 cups of flour, I am going to add 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Now, if you have a sifter, go ahead and sift this flour, or you can run a fork through it several times, or you can take a whisk and incorporate a little air, whisk the baking powder in with your flour. There we go. And we're going to leave our little dry ingredients aside to wait for us. There we go. So in our larger bowl that we're going to use, I'm going to go ahead and beat an egg. I'm going to give that a whisk. I'm going to beat that a little bit. There we go. So I'm going to add to my egg a scant ½ cup of sugar. Now, scant is one of those old-fashioned measuring devices when, baking used to be a little bit less precise. And all that means is that, so I have here my ½ cup measure, and I've just filled it a little bit under the rim. And that scant is just, versus heaping, which is if I had a mound of sugar and then dump that in. There you go. So add that to my egg. And I'm going to put in ½ cup of milk and 2 tablespoons of oil. This is just regular old vegetable oil. You don't want anything with really intense flavoring. Okay. So I'm going to add my dry ingredients to my wet ingredients. And just mix that in a little bit at a time. Now keep this extra bowl around because you're going to need this later. Because this kuchen has kind of a topping, almost like you would think of a crumble or a coffee cake, a streusel. But it's not quite as crunchy on top, but it does bake in kind of a sugary, fruited coating. It's very nice. So there we go. So our batter is completely done. Now, we want to go ahead and put in another ½ cup of flour. Go. ½ cup. And a ½ cup of sugar. Also scant. I went just a little under. There we go. And we're going to add to this 3 tablespoons of butter. And we're just going to mix that in with just a little bit of fork. And you want to kind of go for the consistency. It's best to do this with really cold butter. It's almost like if you were going to cut in butter, where you just want to get it so that it mixes enough to make crumbs. Now, this is one of those things where you could do this with your fingers, and it would come together really nice, or you could just mix it with a fork, like so. And I'm just going to keep mixing this until it basically resembles kind of large breadcrumbs, fresh breadcrumbs. So I'm going to give this a little bit more of a stir, and it's really mixing nicely. So there we go. I'll scrape that off. As you can see, that's pretty much all butter, which is nice, but don't want to necessarily bite into a big mouthful of butter. Oh, well, I might want to, but most people don't want to bite into a large mouthful of butter. Okay, so there we go. We've got our breadcrumbs, our rough breadcrumbs. And we're going to take our prepared pan, going to dump in our batter. Go. This one it's a very light batter, so if you're expecting something really thick, it's not going to be thick. It's actually going to have the consistency of icing. So if you ever worked with icing before, you'll notice that it's just that thin when icing is still warm. Okay, so to that we're going to add a cupful of fruit, and we're just going to sprinkle that fruit right on top. And it's at this point we're like in for a cup with the berries, and that's a nice way to be. Now I find that this is a great thing to have, a great dish to have for breakfast, or if you want to just serve it with coffee in the afternoons, or with tea. It's lovely. I think it's a bit messy, though, if you're just going to be carrying it around. It's definitely something you want to eat while sitting. Okay, so you can take your topping, and it's probably best just to sprinkle that on top. And you want to kind of go crazy. You can kind of mound it into a pile if you want, and it will bake like that. Or you can sprinkle it evenly over the top. I kind of like to sprinkle it evenly over the top. It doesn't look quite as good when it's in the pan. And this is an 8 by 8 inch pan. And I've chosen to put mine in because I really want to serve mine in this pan. So, but you can put it in any kind of pan and take it out and cut it. And once the cooking is completely finished, it's really quite beautiful once you've cut it. So, all right, so that's going to go into the oven for 25 to 35 minutes. And then you want to let that cool before you cut it because it does need to set up. But we're in luck because I have one that's complete. So once we put this in the oven to bake, it should come out looking something like this. Nice and brown, with your berries in the center. And you want to make sure to test this. You want to make sure that if you stick a skewer or a fork in the center that it comes out completely clean, and then take it out immediately. Now I'll cut this so that you can take a good look of what that looks like on the inside. It's a fun little cake. I would eat it constantly if I could eat cake constantly. Luckily, I tend to limit myself to nieces coming over and baking extravaganzas to eat, a day filled with cake, which is pretty much what's happening in my house today. Okay. So this recipe makes 8 squares of kuchen. As you can see, it bakes in the berries. It's 8 servings. There we go. And I like to top my berry-themed fruits and vegetables with more berries. This time an alternative. I'll go with a little blackberries and maybe a little raspberries for color. This is also nice if you serve this with like a dollop of cream. And I have, so if you look up In the Kitchen with Anya or ohyumboston.com, all of the recipes that I'm showing today, including this blackberry cooking and one for lemon cream to put on top. Okay, well, that's that. I hope that you enjoy it.